UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jen Durrell.
I'll let you stop clunking around.
I know, I can't. I know. I'm a wigglewort.
That's where the show should start. Hey, baby.
Hey, baby.
It's so wonderful being back on Talking Weird with you. I love doing this. And you've been super busy since the last episode we recorded. I know the audience sometimes like to know what we've been up to. Do you want to fill them in a little bit on some of your big plans or big achievement, rather, I should say, not a plan, an achievement?
Yeah. Well, I've been super busy because I was studying with my last semester at college. So I graduated in December with an associate's degree. So that's why I've been super busy.
That's fantastic. And I've been pretty busy too. I've been busy because Midwest Weird Fest, the film festival I run in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, is bearing down. It runs March 5 to 7, and we're actually doing it at the cinema. A lot of festivals aren't this year, but we're in a physical venue, and that's in downtown Eau Claire. It's a festival that plays, for those who don't know, horror and underground and a lot of paranormal docos. Over the years, we've played various things from Small Town Monsters and Seth Breedlove, including films which have featured some of the guests we've had on this show. So we've had films with Lyle Blackburn in them, films with Shannon LeGros in them. Of course, we did Hellier last year. You were at the festival, so we had the wonderful Greg Newkirk and Carl Pfeiffer from Hellier there. We also did the world premiere of Linda Godfrey, another one of our guests. Her first documentary, Return to Wildcat Mountain, which was absolutely amazing. And because, like all arts businesses and all cinemas, we've been beat up financially this year, I'm actually running an Indiegogo at the moment to support that festival, and half of the proceeds will go straight to the wonderful little cinema that we screen in the Micon Downtown Cinema. So if anybody wants to help and check out some fantastic perks, there's awesome t-shirts and tote bags and dog tags and all kinds of wonderful things and ticket bundles and magnets and you name it. We've got some very cool stuff. They can go and check it out right now. They just go to Indiegogo and search Midwest, which is one word, and Weirdfest, which is another. So let's go to Indiegogo, check out Midwest Weirdfest, or probably just go to our parent site, charlesfort.org, and you can navigate to the film festival there, and you'll be able to find it. But speaking of the film festival, and speaking of all the wonderful filmmakers we've screened over the years, we have an amazing filmmaker screening his feature documentary this year at the festival, and he's our guest tonight. It's a documentary about one of my favorite actual cryptids, the Mokele-mbembe, which is a dinosaur-like creature which is meant to live in the deep, dark regions of the Congo in Africa. Anyway, our guest is a journalist, a communicator, and as I said, a documentary filmmaker. He was born in France in 1984, and after graduating in communication and film studies in Paris, he embraced a career in the field of international development. He's worked with various United Nations agencies and NGOs in Central Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, and he spent 3 years in Cameroon where he shot 2 feature-length documentaries. In 2018, he filmed something called Message in a Bottle, and in 2020, he filmed the documentary that we'll be talking about tonight, The Explorer. He also has a keen interest and knowledge in cryptozoology, so I'm delighted to introduce to our audience Alexandre Brecher. I think what I loved most about your film is I'm used to consuming, obviously because of Midwest Weird Fest, which this is our first announcement actually, that we're screening your wonderful film, The Explorer, at that festival in March in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. But I'm so used to seeing paranormal documentaries, which I don't want to say they're inferior because that isn't the right word, but they're handled differently. They're not necessarily handled the way somebody who is used to consuming international documentaries is used to seeing a film shot. They're often filmed by the people who are interested in the paranormal themselves, or they're very much focused on the paranormal. One of the things I loved about The Explorer was I could have imagined that Michel, the protagonist of that film, was actually just out there trying to save rhinos or trying to save hippos or something. The story seemed to be more about the human struggle in that environment, in those difficult places, and that kind of quest, and how one can become disheartened on such a quest, more so than about the creatures themselves. So before we get into the film, which is spectacular, I know both Jen and I have a bunch of questions for you about it. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, both as a filmmaker and the rest of your career and life?
Yeah, and that's an extremely good point you've made, because the quest for Mokele-mbembe is absolutely indissociable from the struggle that the local people have and everything. We live in a very poor country where people struggle a lot, and you won't be able to find that beast if you don't respect the people and put some additional elements in your quest that I'd be very happy to talk about later on. But to answer your question about my background, so I've been an expat for the past 15 years. I've worked with NGOs and international organizations most of my life. So I've worked in many war countries. I started my career over there, and I lived for 4 years in Cameroon, and in total 8 years in Africa. Now I live in New Caledonia. And in fact, I embrace this career as an international civil servant. First of all, because I care about people, and also to discover new places in the world, to discover difficult countries and stories to tell. Because I'm also a filmmaker, so I've graduated in film in 2007, film studies, and I've been doing films most of my life. I started doing feature documentaries a couple of years ago. I had an opportunity to produce and direct a documentary on pygmies in Central Africa on behalf of UNICEF. So it was funded by UNICEF, and I did my second one, The Explorer, right after that.
So, what made you decide to do a documentary on how do you say it, Mokele-mbembe?
Mokele-mbembe.
Okay.
Well. So it all comes down to a night. It was in 2015, I guess. I was in Zanga-Sanga, one of the most amazing places in the world. It's a forest clearing in the Central African Republic, and I was there with WWF, the World Wildlife Fund. And it's a magical place because, in fact, it's very hard to spot animals in the Congo Basin rainforest, because the forest is so thick. So you can walk like 5 meters away from an elephant, you won't see it. Now that place is unique because the soil is very salty and muddy, and it rains all the time. And elephants love that place because they come and they consume the salt, which is very important for their diet. So you have basically permanently 150 forest elephants, and you just go there and you're in a kind of Jurassic environment, an amazing place. So one night I was there with WWF. We were camping not far from that huge clearing. And at some point, it was a full moon night, very thick, hot, warm African night, and at some point, around 1 a.m, something happened with the elephants. They all got really scared and escaped the clearing. So you imagine 150 elephants escaping at the same time, and the earth was moving, and I had echo guards with me, people, military, Central African military people. And I'm like, what's happening? What's the reason for that? And they said, maybe we have poachers in the area. We're going to go and look for them. But, most probably, because we haven't heard any gunshots, it's Mokele-mbembe. I said, what? I said, yeah, and Mokele-mbembe, it's a big animal that lives in the area, and the elephants are very scared of him. And I was not familiar at all with that. And then, so they went out to look for poachers. They couldn't find anything, but they found like big footprints. And they say, yeah, there's Mokele-mbembe footprints. So I got interested in that story and so on. And then, well, a couple of years later, I found a book in a French library, a book written by Michel Ballot. So this man, a former lawyer who's been looking for Mokele-mbembe for the past 15 years, who left everything to embark on that quest. I mean, I got fascinated by that story. So after reading the book, I need to find this guy's contact, So I find his email on the web. I contacted him and everything, and I asked him, look, I mean, I'm a big fan of what you're doing. And I heard about Mokele-mbembe. I tell him the whole story about the Central African Republic, and I was like, okay, one day I'd love to join one of your expeditions. And the guy is, okay, I'm leaving in 3 months. Come, join me. So that's what I did, and that was my first expedition with Michel. I shot the movie on the second expedition.
Wow.
That initial story of yours about being out with the military or the game wardens and the elephants fleeing puts a different spin on one of the questions I was going to ask you, which is, in a way, a cynical, or even though I'm somebody with a great interest in the weird and the paranormal, because in the film, it almost seems to imply something that I've long suspected, and that's regardless of the reality of the Mokele-mbembe, is that the local population might very well see Western explorers and Western tourists as a potential way for them to make money. So then, no pun intended, but it almost further muddies the waters as to the reality of the creature. And so I was going to ask you, what are your feelings on that? But you're telling me an experience where you had locals talk about the Mokele-mbembe, and I'm assuming there was no way they were trying to grift you to get them to take you into the interior or something. But do you think that plays into it a little bit, the idea that people might be trying to get money, so they talk about this creature more to Westerners who are interested?
But one very interesting, important thing to remember is that for the local people, and a huge number of local people spreads across a very vast forest. So the pygmies from Gabon to the Bantu of the Car, or I mean, whatever, they all, for them, Mokele-mbembe is a reality. It's not something fantastic or surreal. I've seen an UFO or I've seen a Bigfoot or whatever. It's something they say they see quite often, So basically, you go to Africa, you ask a local guy, to take you to see some elephants. He would ask you for a bit of money for that, and try to get money. You need to rent a car, you need to hire some people or whatever, and we're gonna take you to see elephants. So for them, Mokele-mbembe is the same thing. Huh. And one other thing to know is that place is so remote. So the village that you see in the movie, the village of Ndongo, is the last village before the great rainforest. It's very difficult to reach that place. It takes 3 days by car from Yaoundé, the capital, and then another couple of days by boat to reach that village, and then you have nothing. I mean, only the forest. So there's no tourism industry over there, and people are not used to take money from tourists and everything. So basically, you have to separate the truth and, I would say, the business, but there's so little business that you have lots of truth.
Michel seemed to be himself not a sucker, if that makes sense, in that documentary. Like, he seems to be very wary just to throw money at people who might be, just trying to take advantage of him, which was something I found interesting as well.
Well, he supports local people. These people are very poor. I mean, they live with much less than $1 per day. So you have to support them. I mean, you come from abroad, obviously you'll bring a computer or a pair of boots or whatever, small little gifts, and that people expect that from him because he's been going to that area for the past 15 years, He knows that's part of the deal. But once again, when you speak with local people, and I try to show that in the movie, that's just something, a component of the quest, but there's some truth behind that. It's not a giant rip-off. It could be, some friends sometimes watching the movie told me, that guy's being ripped off and everything. No, he accepts to do some gifts and to enter that system because that's the only way to move forward with his quest.
I think Jen had some questions about the more spiritual beliefs surrounding Mokele-mbembe as well. Is that right?
Oh, well, in the documentary, I noticed that the tribal elders had asked Michel if he believed whether or not it was a mystical creature. And he didn't really want to admit to that. And I'm a paranormal investigator, so that kind of makes sense to me that, we're all made of energy. So after you pass away, emotions end up imprinting on items, homes, land, and can leave a residual haunt. So I guess what I'm asking is, do you think that it's a possibility that it is a mystical creature? Or do you think it's an actual living, breathing animal?
Well, so for the local people, so the pygmies and the Bantus, most of the big animals that you can find in the rainforest, so elephants, gorillas, are mystical creatures. And they're worshipped as gods because, we're in an animist context. So for these people, it is indeed a mystical creature as well as a real creature. It's both. For me, it's a creature of flesh and blood, cold blood, because I believe it's a reptile. But no, for me, it's a real animal. For Michel as well. Just a quick story. Michel at the beginning during his first expeditions would go in the villages with a book with pictures of different animals inside. And he would show local villagers, different pictures. So that he would show them an elephant. They would say, that's an elephant. A gorilla, that's a gorilla. I mean, animals are used to. A bear, and you don't have bears in the African. They say, we don't know what that is, And then a drawing of a sauropod dinosaur. They say, that's Mokele-mbembe. So yes, it's definitely for me a real creature.
Yeah.
I think there's a part in the documentary that touches on that to a degree as well, where Michel seems to be, I think as Jenn was hinting at, a little bit more reluctant to look at some of the more mystical aspects of it. But some of his colleagues or some of the fellow adventurers are saying, well, this might be the way that, they see it. So you can't kind of just disregard the beliefs that they attach to this creature or the way that they've always talked about calling the creature or dealing with the creature. And I think there is it's a very modern or a very Western thing where we tend to want to demarcate between, is it physically real or is it somehow spiritual? And I think it's interesting, as you pointed out then, that perhaps the locals in the area look at it somewhere in between that. It's a very Western mindset to have to make this kind of demarcation.
Of course, you're right, and that's always the big question: how far are we able to go, and are we willing to go in the mystical side of that? To find the animal. Basically, it takes a lot of time, to mount an expedition, to go over there, and you have to. I mean, every day counts, So you have to give importance and to spend time following these local rituals. Because you need local support. You just can't go as a Westerner in the forest and you won't find anything. So you need some local support. But Michel and I and the other members of the expedition, we tend to have a scientific approach. We're looking for footprints. We're looking for traces of the beasts. So there's only a limited amount of time we can give to local traditions and local culture because actually, the idea is to go as quick as we can, into the forest and to look at everything. I mean, that's the thing. But it is a very, very important aspect to take into consideration, to respect. You can hear stories and you can have some interesting clues through that mystical side, but it's not the only way to find Mokele-mbembe.
Are you aware, out of interest, of a fellow expatriate also from France, Jacques Vallee? Have you ever read any of Jacques Vallee's work?
Not yet.
You'd probably be very interested. Jacques Vallee's background was he was an astrophysicist and he was an information scientist. He has a PhD and his background's very much a part of that Western tradition that I'm talking about. He was very much involved in investigating the UFO phenomenon in the United States of America. He was very good friends with Alan Hynek, who was the scientific head of Project Blue Book back in the day when the Air Force had this unit looking into this kind of UFO phenomenon. Anyway, Vallee always tended to lean towards the physical extraterrestrial hypothesis. But in 1969, when the University of Colorado did a study on UFO reports, and it seemed to be quite crooked. It's a long story, so I won't get into it, but it seems like they dismissed them quite out of hand. Vallee seemed to lose interest in the scientific method and almost felt that the scientific institution had somehow failed looking at the phenomenon. And he seemed to have this change of heart or this epiphany where he began to look at the phenomenon, meaning the UFO phenomenon, as something somehow paraphysical or something metaphysical or something spiritual's probably the wrong word, but not little green men in a saucer from out of space. Maybe it was a phenomenon that had been here with us for a very long time. And Jacques Vallee probably remains the most important thinker in UFO belief today. And I know that's not your field, but why I think it's interesting and why I think there are some parallels to Mokele-mbembe and to all kinds of cryptids is that there are often physical traces left, which Vallee himself has documented and done lots of investigations into, which seem to imply that there is a physicality, at least temporarily, to UFOs or to other things, the way they might leave burn marks on people or burn marks in fields or, crush a fence when they land or whatever. And the same way that you might find a Sasquatch footprint, or you might find Mokele-mbembe tracks or evidence that Mokele-mbembe's eaten leaves out of a tree or something. But to tie it back into older traditions, which this is the part which fascinates me as a cultural historian, is that these things, and I'm not asserting whether they're real, whether they're part physical, not, but psychologically and you see it very much in your documentary, I think, is that they fulfill these old ideas of something not quite being within civilization and just out of reach. When I say fairy tale, I don't mean it dismissively like Disney fairies or something ridiculous, but there's a long Western tradition that things coexist with us, and we can never quite bring that physical evidence back to the real world. And so I don't want to give too much away about the documentary because it's fantastic and everybody needs to see it, but the revelation of the footprints in there, for example, is one of those moments that to me, and looking at from somebody who's interested in fairy lore or somebody who approaches the phenomenon like a Jacques Vallee, for example, is that there are these always just out of reach pieces of evidence, but it never quite gets us there. I don't know if that's a frustration that you felt when you've been out in the field looking for these things, or...
Well, it is. And coming back on the traditional aspects and legendary aspect, I would say, if I can tell you a quick story, because I've been investigating for many years on Mokele-mbembe and everything and trying to put all the chances on my side. I'm a filmmaker, but I'm also a cryptozoologist. So I've been studying that story in depth. And actually, another Frenchman, a friend of Michel Ballot as well, was a hunter in the Central African Republic for many years. And while he was exploring the Sanaga River, he found some footprints and some traces and some first-hand testimonies of Mokele-mbembe's existence, from local pygmies. And these local pygmies told him at some point, look, I mean, if you really want to see Mokele-mbembe, you have to be initiated first to go through our rites and to get some initiation and everything. It's going to take many years, about 10, 15 years. And then we're going to bring you and see Mokele-mbembe. And the guy actually ended up living most of the year, in the Central African Republic and doing all these steps towards, I would say, mental enlightenment from a pygmy perspective. And after 15 years, they told him, now you're ready, you're one of us, and we're going to take you to see Mokele-mbembe soon. And the guy died just before that from fevers. And, when you spend too much time in Africa, when you're a Westerner, you get sick. We all got sick. I got sick myself. I mean, the guy died and he was married. And Michel immediately called his wife and said, okay, can you give me all his archive and his books and the notebooks and everything? Because, I mean, he knew where actually the Mokele-mbembe could be found. And she told him, I burnt everything because Africa took my husband. I don't want Africa to take another person.
Oh my God.
So we lost everything, all the archive and everything. So there's an interesting theory that the mystical path is one of the doors towards Mokele-mbembe, but for us, for Michel and I, it's just one of the doors, and there are definitely other doors that must be explored.
I think you were going to ask about initiation ceremonies too, Jen. You were talking on the phone to me about something you'd seen about it.
I'm curious whether or not they actually had a ritual or if anybody had seen them do a ritual for that.
Yes, there are different rituals. And I was not allowed to film these rituals, just the end. But basically, when you're on a quest like this one, before you leave the village, so which is the last human settlement, they do a sacrifice to the river and to the gods of the river. So they would get some food and a bit of tobacco and everything, and do a prayer and drop that, give that to the river. So I've seen it, and I was only allowed to film the end of that sacrifice when the guy prays. In fact, and I kept this shot in the documentary.
Okay.
In the edits. So you do have different rituals taking place. If you remember the documentary well, so Michel at some point agrees for them to do some rituals to help support the expedition, and so they did it, but not in our presence because we're not initiated. And that's some very important thing to know. They're very shy about their culture. It's not like you're welcome, and they don't try to. It's not like a Western religion where you try to attract more people to follow you and everything. It's just like you are rejected from that. I remember my first documentary. I've lived for 1.5 months with the pygmies in the rainforest, and we became very friends. But sometimes at night they would go to a sacred forest and do their rituals and everything, and I was not invited. It takes years and years and years, so, well, what I like to believe, is that once Michel accepted for them to do the ritual and gave them obviously a bit of money, to bring some people in and to buy some food, and because you have to do that, they did the ritual. And while we were in the forest, and actually during that expedition, we found something. I don't spoil the documentary, but we did find something. So I like to believe that the ritual was part of making us find something. I don't know. I have no proof of the thing.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
A quick little aside, my 4-year-old daughter is obsessed with dinosaurs. Obsessed with dinosaurs. And she doesn't speak a lick of French. I hardly do either. But she was glued to the documentary. Like, we watched it together because it starts with are you with your son in the beginning?
It's my son.
Yeah,
yes.
And you're going to the
yes.
museums and seeing the Brontosaurus or Apatosaurus or whatever it is, skeleton. And she's obviously glued from there on in. And of course, when Michel is traveling around, he has that little dinosaur Brontosaurus type figure to say, "Is this what you've seen?" And that alone was enough to get her attention. And I told her I was talking to the man who went there tonight. And oh my goodness, was she excited? She was excited that.
That's great. My son is very excited with dinosaurs too, and the small plastic dinosaur that you see in the documentary. So Michel gave it to me, and I gave it to my son, and it's his favorite toy now. So.
Oh wow! So before we leave the film, and Jen might have some more questions about the film before we leave it as well, but I'll probably ask my last one about the film before I have some other questions to ask you. Is do you plan on going back and shooting a sequel or doing any more actual on the ground investigation with Michel and looking for the Mokele-mbembe?
Yes, absolutely. So Michel went back a couple of times since we shot the movie. He found very interesting footprints, and he also pursued his quest on the mystical side. So he met some initiated people, some mystical elders, and some other chiefs and people he didn't have access to. So we are indeed planning an expedition. Hopefully when the health crisis is over, we want to go back there to do a longer expedition, maybe a couple of months. So to spend time with the local village elders to try to dig more and to know more about the legend from their point of view. And then obviously to go and to try to reach these caves, that we're trying to reach in the documentary that are supposed to be the den of Mokele-mbembe. I mean, if we find these caves, we might find proof, rather than footprints, because for science, footprints aren't proof. I know they are, but we'd love to find a bone or to find something, or we want to take DNA testers as well. And one last thing about these caves, so according to the local trackers, there would be paintings in some of the caves that you can find in that remote place. And if one of these paintings represents a dinosaur, it's a win, and that's proof, because obviously dinosaurs and humans weren't living in the same period. So if we want something, in the paintings, in local tradition, I mean, we just want to prove that animal exists. So obviously, I want to go back there, and I want to continue the movie.
You were talking about the other film you did prior to The Explorer about, and what was the name of it, about the local pygmies that you'd spent time with?
Oh, so the movie is called A Message in a Bottle.
Okay.
And the pygmy, I spent time with the Baka pygmies from who live exactly at the border between Cameroon and the Central African Republic in the rainforest. So it's the same area, basically.
And when you were with them, did you hear stories about other cryptids or other things which mightn't be known to science?
Yes, actually. So obviously you have Mokele-mbembe, and I've discussed a lot with the pygmies about Mokele-mbembe and everything because that's my focus. But you have another one called Emela-ntouka as well, who's it's very funny because what I always do is ask the people to draw the cryptids, on the floor and everything. So, and basically they would draw a triceratops with elephant ears and a big horn,
Oh, wow.
And Emela-ntouka means the elephant killers, and it's an animal that's supposed to attack elephants. And they also talk about rhinos. They say, okay, we've seen a rhino, the day before yesterday and everything, but in fact, you don't have rhinos in the area. So finding a rhino over there or a rhino subspecies would be a cryptid.
Wow.
And just one very important story, it's always critical to listen at what people have to say. If you look at African cryptozoology, in the late 19th century, the local people would talk in Africa, in Congo, would talk about the hairy man, who very dangerous animal, that looks like a man, but is not a man. He lives in the mountain and everything. And then people discovered the mountain gorilla.
Huh.
And then the okapi. I don't know if you've heard about that animal. It's the exact mix, if you look at it, between a zebra and a horse. So the back is a zebra, and so local people would tell, explorers or scientists, there's this animal. It's a mix between a zebra and a horse. Too good to be true, And finally, only in the early 20th century, they found the okapi. So basically, there's always some truth in what people say. A triceratops, a sauropod, I don't know, maybe, they exaggerate. So maybe the Mokele-mbembe is not 15 meters long, but maybe it's just like 4 or 5 meters long. But that would already be something to find such an animal.
Now I am going back to the film because this question's kind of pushed me in that direction. It's such a wonderful film. It's hard not to keep talking about it. But you mentioned in there that I think there's maybe a hydroelectric project or a dam coming to the area, which is going. Is that gone ahead yet, that project, or is it in the process of still going ahead? Or
it has been signed. Okay. And China is supposed to invest in the area, so it's certainly going to be built. Well, there are some local associations and some environmentalists that try to fight against that project. So it has been delayed, and there were some lawsuits and everything. But eventually, it's going to happen because you don't have access to electricity over there, and a dam would provide electricity to lots of villages and small cities across 3 countries. It's a tripartite project. So basically, the forest, that part of the forest, will certainly be flooded, and it's heartbreaking because it's very unique. According to the World Wildlife Fund, we don't know about the half. We only know the half of what lives and dies every day on this forest. So we discover new species of frogs, of insects, of birds, whatever, every day, and obviously we can discover larger animals, but they're going to disappear. It's a whole ecosystem that's going to disappear. But, and that's the problem of being a Westerner sometimes, Obviously, as a Westerner, you would shout and say, stop that. It's so beautiful. You have to protect that forest, But people tell you, look at your country, look at France, you've killed most of the animals. You've destroyed your ecosystem. Why do you want us to protect ours? We want electricity. We don't have electricity. What can you say to that?
Yeah, there's a double standard, but it's still very difficult, of course, to think of the destruction of that area. But you don't want to, I can see the catch-22 because the people shouldn't be deprived of the type of luxuries that we're so used to in the West. So what do you think then will be the impact? Let's just assume for a minute the Mokele-mbembe and the other types of cryptids are actually physical beings that are there, do you expect then that there'll be a discovery of them, or they'll just be wiped out? Or you obviously have a better sense of where the build's going to go than I do. What do you think's going to happen then?
You mean if the dam project
what
happens
impact would that have on the Mokele-mbembe if it actually is a physical sauropod living there somewhere?
Well, I mean, obviously, most of the animals living there will disappear, but it's just, in fact, a small area of the Congo Basin. And you had observations of Mokele-mbembe in Gabon, in the swamps, unexplored swamps of North Gabon, in the Republic of Congo, obviously. If you look at the history of the Mokele-mbembe research, and in the US, it was very famous in the early 80s, with a couple of expeditions taking place around Lac Tele. I don't know if you remember some expeditions by Roy McCall from the University of Chicago, I guess, if I'm not wrong, he died recently, a prominent American scientist who got very interested in Mokele-mbembe in the 80s, and who conducted a couple of expeditions around Lake Tele, which is another very important place for Mokele-mbembe observations, and that's in the north of the Republic of Congo. So basically, if that area gets flooded, yes, some Mokele-mbembe living in the area might disappear, but there's many other places in this forest that's basically half the size of Europe, so it's a huge forest where, I mean, other Mokele could live. We know as a fact that to keep a species living, you need about 1,000 individuals. And I believe that there's no one Mokele, obviously, but maybe more.
Yeah, that was my next question for you. Actually, cryptozoology often talks about how many Sasquatches do you need to keep that population. So you think there's probably about 1,000 Mokele-mbembes in that broader throw then, or do you think there's more, or?
Well, I mean, according to a few scientists of the French Natural History Museum, you need about 1,000 Mokele-mbembe to live over there. They could be 1,000, they could be more. We don't know. Once again, that forest is so mysterious. A few years ago, some wildlife organizations tried to count the gorillas, and it was nearly impossible because there are places that are so inaccessible. We're talking about a real uncharted territory. There are no paths. If you look at Google Maps, you see a big green spot and no roads, no paths, and everything. So it's very hard to count the animals. And on the northern shore of Lake Tele in the Republic of Congo, they found a population of 10,000 or 15,000 gorillas very recently, about a year ago. So it's absolutely impossible to say how many Mokeles there are. But we know that because of the potential survival of the species, they should be 1,000 or maybe more.
That is one of the notable things about that area. It does have that lost world kind of feel to it. And interestingly, I think in your documentary, here I am talking about the film again, I can't help myself. I think you cut in some scenes from that old silent film, The Lost World, yes, the Arthur Conan Doyle adaptation. But certainly, often one of the things that makes me not suspicious of people reporting cryptids, because I think people genuinely are seeing something, but my often reluctance to accept it as a physical being is that when somebody sees a Sasquatch down the road from where I live. Now, I live in a wooded area, but there isn't enough woods to keep a sustainable Sasquatch population. I mean, that's the reality. So I tend to have to drift into other interpretations. But when you look at the Congo Basin and you look at the area there, you can imagine, perhaps like an old Arthur Conan Doyle book, that maybe there is enough area there where some kind of species could indeed continue to exist that we're unaware of. And you mentioned a number of things which once would have been cryptids, like the gorilla and the other horse-like creature you mentioned, that have been found. So I think that is something which separates the Mokele-mbembe from a lot of other talk of other cryptids.
Absolutely. And that's a very good point. When you read Conan Doyle's Lost Worlds, the story takes place in the Amazon rainforest. So the Amazon rainforest is larger, a bit larger than the Congo Basin, but it's more explored. It has been explored for centuries, when there are roads and there's lots of deforestation, everything is more developed, I would say, than the Congo Basin. That's one of the last real unexplored places on Earth, along with some mountains in Papua New Guinea or some very remote valleys in Madagascar. So you have a few places like that. and when you search for an animal like Mokele-mbembe, you look at all the factors, you look for facts, so is that area unexplored enough and remote enough to host a large population, 1,000 of a big animal? Yes. And you tick some boxes. You look at other places and other cryptids and other legends, and I remember having that conversation with a scientist that you see at the end of the movie, Benoît Grison, one of the most prominent French scientists and passionate about cryptozoology as well. And we're talking about the Loch Ness monster. And say, like, in terms of ecological factors for the Loch Ness to host a species like Nessie. Well, the lake is very poor in terms of fish, so you wouldn't be able to feed a population of 1,000 animals, and it's much smaller than the area you're investigating. So he doesn't believe in the Loch Ness monster. But the Congo Basin, why not? Why not?
And speaking of other locations and other cryptids, you mentioned just before we actually started recording the call that you spent time in Papua New Guinea and that type of area as well, right? And there's only one cryptid I know from there, and you said you could talk about some. Maybe this is one of them. I know there's stories from there of a pterodactyl-like creature, which I think they called the ripon or the ripon or something. Like there's stories of a big prehistoric flying reptile-type animal. Can you talk about that, or can you talk about other cryptid stories you learnt about from your time in that area?
Well, so I've just traveled once over there, and that's an area that I'm very, very interested in now because I live in the South Pacific. So yeah, I've heard these stories of that pterodactyl or thunderbird and roaming in the area. But what interests me the most is Orang Pendek. So it's a species that spreads between PNG and Indonesia. I mean, all these islands. It's a small human-like monkey.
Mm-hmm.
And you had lots of observations. I mean, traces, and and once again, when we're talking about facts and ecological factors that can prove that an area would host a species, if you look at the forest for Papua New Guinea, I mean, they tick all the boxes, for a species of a big ape looking like a human living there. So it would be the Sasquatch from PNG, but it's very likely that such an animal lives there. So there have been lots of investigations going on there, lots of traces and even hair. I mean, have been found, lots of evidence, but no direct observation or no film observation. So I'm in contact with a few people over there, including local Papu cryptozoologists. So it's good to know that local people are creating associations and are starting to look by themselves for what happens over there. So yeah, I might go as well on the expedition over there.
Oh, wow.
Well, depends on the success of my movie as well. If I find a producer who trusts me for doing a second movie or a couple of second movies, about cryptozoology, I'd like to do more. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I would love to see that next one, or the second and the third and the fourth, or however many you do. That'd be fantastic. This is probably a controversial question, and it just popped into my mind now because so many of the cryptids we've talked about tonight, and indeed so many of the cryptids that are talked about, period, seem to be prehistoric relics. So whether it's a sauropod like the Mokele-mbembe, whether it's the one which I forget its name, but you said it's like a triceratops, or whether it's a pterodactyl type creatures in Papua New Guinea, or whether it's a little hairy men like you were talking about, or big hairy men, which seem to also maybe be Gigantopithecus if they're big, or some Neanderthalish or proto-Neanderthalish throwback. So many of these things seem to be relics from a distant past. Now, if we look at them as being physical, does that mean potentially that the history which the scientific paradigm holds about the Earth being very, 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 very old, could it be that perhaps, maybe it is just that old, but could it be that some of these stories like dragons and things like that, there was actually a continuing existence with us, with these kind of creatures, until almost the modern period where they were better known? Like certainly in biblical period through to perhaps the early medieval period, there seems to be more stories in the historical record of people killing things like dragons or having interactions with these creatures. Now it always seems to be people don't seem to be killing them as much, but they might see them somewhere. Does that somehow throw the entire scientific paradigm into how these things lived much longer before man than they actually did, if that makes sense?
Well, it does, and it is indeed a controversial question. Well, coming back to what I know best, which is the quest for Mokele-mbembe, you have different kind of explorers and of researchers, and you have lots of people, including a few friends in the U.S., which I respect a lot, who are also looking for a living dinosaur to try to challenge what science has been telling us for years, and to prove that the evolution is not exactly as we believe it is. We're not in this approach, and I personally don't believe that Mokele-mbembe is a relic dinosaur. I believe that it's certainly an animal that has been evolving without being found so far, but it's maybe a giant monitor lizard. If you go to the Komodo Islands, for example, in Indonesia, you will see these big monitor lizards, and maybe it's a bigger one, a new species and everything, but I don't think it is a dinosaur, and neither Michel. We are looking for a new species of animal, and that's it, so the comparison with dinosaurs is I would say, people have been using it a lot to promote the quest for Mokele-mbembe. Oh, there's a dinosaur living in Africa, It's always more easier to sell that story than, okay, there's a new species of animal living in Africa and we're going to look for it. Now, coming back to dinosaurs, this big fish, this coelacanth, that has been found in the Comoros Islands, or even sharks, or there are so many animals that have survived, from prehistoric times. But we don't think that Mokele-mbembe has survived. We think that it's a totally new species.
There's a lot of armchair cryptozoologists. I don't consider myself a cryptozoologist, but if I was one, I'd be an armchair cryptozoologist. I mean, I do a lot of my theorizing from behind a computer. But there's certainly a lot of cryptozoologists who their big adventure might be to spend a weekend in the Sierra Mountains here, or to go into the backwoods of Kentucky or something. And no offense to any of those people. But what you and Michel do seems to really be putting your money where your mouth is. Like, it seems to be I'm watching that documentary when you guys are slogging through that impenetrable jungle, and I'm like, you don't see it, but I'm conscious enough of the outdoors to be aware of there's got to be all kinds of dangers, and as you were saying, sicknesses and poisonous critters and things that can take you out. Both during your time looking for things like the Mokele-mbembe and other trips you've done similarly, and also your time working for NGOs, which I know you've done. Can you tell us some situations where you might have been in that life-threatening situation, or where things were particularly dangerous or hairy?
Well, I mean, most of the time you spent in the equatorial rainforest is particularly dangerous because, as you said, you have lots of insects that can kill you. You have snakes that can kill you. So you have green and black mambas. And also another snake. I never understood what locals were talking about, but they call it the snake 3-2-1 because it's like it bites you and 3-2-1 and it's over,
Gosh.
So, so you have lots of animals and elephants. We've been charged. We kind of see that in the documentary because I was filming, but running at the same time and everything. But, elephants, a forest elephant that's defending something, a calf, for example, he will chase you until he kills you, if you're lucky enough to escape, that's good, but that animal can kill you. The savanna elephant is more peaceful, but the forest elephant is very aggressive. So basically, you're threatened by tons of animals. It's a very hostile place. And you also have the fever, so you take anti-malaria drugs, but still they're efficient up to a certain point, and you can still get malaria. I got a filariasis. I came back with that. So 6 months after I came back, my hand started to becoming bigger, and I went to see the doctor, and he told me, okay, basically you have worms, like micro worms in your blood. Have you been traveling to some tropical countries recently, sir? I say, yeah, maybe, So I got that, and so I've been cured for that and everything. So, but basically, if you have no treatment, you die. So you have all these dangers. And at the beginning, you're afraid of everything, and you look, at every branch. You grab if there's a snake on the branch, but after 10 days, when you eat only once a day, like dry food, or you're so weak, and you just don't care about dangers anymore, and you go. I have a funny story, So one night I was sleeping in my tent. We were sleeping on an island when we were coming back from that expedition on the Ja River. So we were sleeping on an island, and at some point I wanted to stretch, and my feet touched something, a kind of cold and a strange thing out of my tent, So I opened the door of my tent, in fact, it was a giant python sliding, in front of my tent, and I was like, okay, it's 4 a.m. I'm exhausted. That thing is not gonna kill me, so I just closed the door and went back to sleep. That's the attitude you have after a few weeks in the jungle.
Gosh, the documentary captures that moment with Michel where he seems like he's just had enough of this pursuit. You know what I mean? He seems to just, I don't want to do this anymore. It's too painful. I've got children and a wife back home, and I just seem to be being led in the wrong direction. You're behind the camera and you're documenting it, so you don't really capture your idea of your feeling. You can see the frustration in his face, but have you felt that while you're out there as well? Have you I'm never doing this again. I've had absolutely enough. I'm done with this.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you have to film. So basically my film crew, was very reduced because it was myself handling the camera and a pygmy guy from the team helping me with the sound, and that's it.
Huh, that's a small crew.
Yes, it is. But I didn't want to bring some other people with me and a bigger crew because I wanted to become invisible, to catch the moment and to catch the emotions and on people's face, and to be very discreet, to embed myself in the expedition and not to become the story, obviously. So another thing, and the forest part was the 5 or 6 days we spent in the forest were very, very difficult because I had to film. So I had to run in front of the group, to take the nice shots and the right angles and everything, and then to come back. And I lost 7 kgs during these few days in the forest.
Not bad.
So yeah, it was very, very exhausting. At some point, when you can't sleep very well because you're too tired, so you will go to sleep at midnight or 1 a.m, and at 3 or 3:30 you have to wake up for another day of working and filming and going somewhere in the forest. You just don't want to wake up. You want to tell the team, like, look, guys, leave me there. Come and pick me up at some point because, but then you move on, and that I knew that there would be some reward at the end, and in fact, we got the most amazing reward. After these weeks in the forest and everything, I knew that certainly a good movie, or the movie I wanted, in my camera, but still no evidence, nothing that related to Mokele-mbembe. And at the end of that journey, through darkness, through unexplored places, we go out, we find it. It was like paradise, to exit the forest. We start living again. And what was magical is that we got a reward, and we see it in the movie. Once again, I don't want to spoil it. So that was, it was certainly one of the greatest moments in my life.
Oh, it's a beautiful scene. You can feel the impact and the joy in that. You really captured the feeling, I think, in you and the other people there. It's pretty spectacular. And perhaps before we go, I could do a whole podcast with you just talking about film, because when you're talking about being out there in the jungle and having to do this, I'm wondering, your batteries must be dying. You've got all of these condensation problems with the lenses. Like, I'm imagining as a filmmaker, all of these problems, but that would take way too long and probably be too minutiae boring for the non-filmmaker. But what were your influences? Like, you mentioned you found Michel's book, so he was obviously an influence, but are there other cryptozoologist influences on you, and or are there filmmaker or other documentarian influences on your work?
Of course. So, well, in terms of cryptozoology, I think most of the cryptozoologists have been influenced by Bernard Heuvelmans, who is a Belgian scientist, who is the father of cryptozoology, who wrote many books. So I grew up reading these books. And in terms of filmmakers, well, I love Werner Herzog.
I suspected that, actually. I would have guessed.
Of course.
So good.
Of course. So yes, I mean, lots of these movies, were for me a great source of inspiration. And but once again, I wanted to do this movie using my own style, would it being influenced by anyone, because that's what Michel and the team deserves. I'm a big fan of these guys. In fact, Michel, having dropped everything 15 years ago, to go and to embark on this quest because he's so passionate about cryptozoology that he wanted his life to be dedicated to that. And obviously he struggles with money, and it's not easy to find sponsors for the expedition. It's becoming harder and harder, but still he keeps going in that very hostile place. So when I first discussed about the movie, with him, I told him, like, look, I like this movie and I'd like us to do something similar and everything. And then he told me, like, just make your movie and I'll be happy with it.
Oh, wow. Well, it's a fantastic movie. I was absolutely enthralled. I know Jen was, and even my 4-year-old who doesn't speak a lick of French was enthralled. So I can't wait to screen it for our audience at Midwest Weird Fest, March 5 to 7 at the Micon Downtown Cinema. And please keep in touch with us, Alex, because you were an absolutely amazing guest. You're an incredibly talented filmmaker, and I'm sure you have hundreds of other stories to tell. But as soon as you're starting to roll into another film, please let us know, and keep in touch regardless, because it was just a joy to talk to you.
It was a joy for me as well, and it's a great honor to be selected for the next edition of the Weird Fest. What I would really like, maybe as a final message, is to send the audiences of the Weird Fest the message that there are still some places on Earth that are unexplored. That maybe in these places there are some mysteries that are waiting to be discovered, and that adventure is not dead. Despite our science and despite the fact that we know everything and our deeply interconnected world and everything, still we know nothing when it comes to these places. So adventure is still very much alive, and awaits for adventurers. We can all be adventurers. So that's the message I wanted to send. And thank you so much for hosting me today. It was a real pleasure for me as well.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Alex was a fascinating guest, and the Mokele-mbembe remains one of this weird planet's most fascinating cryptids. Alex's fantastic documentary about the creature is just starting its film festival run, and recently won Best Documentary at another Hole in the Head film festival. It will be screening at the 5th Annual Midwest Weird Fest, which takes place at the Micon Downtown Cinema from March 5 to 7 in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Keep an eye out for it at a festival near you or online. Check out a link to the film's trailer in this episode's show notes. Follow the film on Facebook at The Explorer Film. Of course, you can always find us at talkingweird.com. That little voice you can hear in the background is my little daughter Chloe snuggling into me at the moment. Alternatively, you can visit our Fortean hub site, charlesfort.org. There you can find the full Talking Weird episode archive, Midwest Weird Fest, and an array of other Fortean content, as well as an extensive paranormal-themed t-shirt store. Buy a t-shirt and support the show. Chloe apparently finds that whole bit hilarious. And if you haven't already, please like Talking Weird on Facebook and Instagram at Talking Weird Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to the podcast. It's available on most podcast platforms, Facebook and YouTube. And if you've enjoyed this episode of Talking Weird, please leave us a review. Jen and I would really appreciate it. We'll be back soon for another conversational journey into the world's stranger realms. But for now, from here, deep in the North Woods, Chloe and I bid you a fond farewell. And until next time, please, keep it weird.
Keep it weird.